Okay. This point in the class, we've covered everything has a reason for why it's covered where it is in the class. We started out by doing a lot of probability because I wanted to begin the class with some of the harder material. After the second exam, we started talking about Keno, which is again one of the more challenging concepts in class. And what we're covering today is something that really lends itself better to traditional learning. I was planning on showing you guys a bunch of different slot machine games and showing you some videos online. I'll try to give you some of that, but ultimately today's lecture is going to be a little bit quicker than it normally would be because we don't have that time for back and forth. To motivate this, I want to show you guys Nevada gaming revenue over the last year. So this is the newest report from the Nevada Gambling Commission, and this shows how much casinos are earning. This is just revenues from these games, okay? So it doesn't include cost. But if you look at revenues from these games, table games generated about $3.7 billion in revenues for casinos over the last year. Of those, Baccarat edged out Blackjack as the number one game. We've talked about Blackjack, craps, and roulette. Maybe we'll talk about Baccarat. When I taught this class in the past, we learned how to play it. Frankly, it's not a very good game. It just has a lot of players that bet a lot in this game. So if you go to a casino and you want to see somebody betting a lot of money, go watch somebody play Baccarat because people tend to wager a lot. So this is a major game for casinos, but for the average player, it's not a game they really care all that much about. So we could talk about it, but I haven't decided yet. Sports and racing. So this is like sports betting and betting on horse racing and that sort of thing. They're usually lumped together. If you go to a casino, where you place these bets are going to be at the same place. About $380 million in revenues from those games, which is not a whole lot, right, compared to the table games up here. And so that leaves the one last category here that we haven't talked about at all in this class, slots and video poker. And it turns out the slots and video poker are responsible for about $8 billion in revenues for Nevada casinos over the last year, which makes it the majority of the casino's revenues. You can see it absolutely dwarfs some of these other categories. You hear people talk about craps, craps, roulette, blackjack. These are games that have really entered the general cultural lexicon in the United States. You will watch a movie, you'll see somebody talking about these things. They're culturally important, but you can see that slots, that's where the money is for these casinos. So a lot of what casinos do is just try to figure out a way to get people to play more of these slots. And there's some reasons why these are particularly good games for the casinos. So I'm sure all of y'all have some taste of slots. You have some idea how they work. And what I'm going to be doing now is just really just going over some of the key points for slots. Generally speaking, slots have a high house advantage, and perhaps more importantly, very fast gameplay. And that very fast gameplay needs to be understood. So when you see a slots game, by the way, the house advantage on these is often about 6 to 12%. So when you see that 6 to 12%, the immediate response there is that's pretty big. It's far more than, say, a typical blackjack game or craps game. It's less than, say, Keno. It's way less than the Georgia Lottery. But the thing to recognize here is if you're playing slots, you can play super fast. All right. So compare this to, say, craps, which craps actually, if you think about individual bets, is a pretty slow game. If I go up to the craps table and I make a $10 pass line bet, it may take several minutes for that bet to resolve, to either win or to lose. Whereas in slots, you're just pressing a button and you might be able to play 20 or 30 games of that slot machine in just 1 minute. So that speed is really important. So not only does it have a high house advantage, but since players can play so frequently, that house advantage has a better way of revealing itself. So if you go to a casino and you play craps the entire time, a player could win or lose, obviously, right? And it's not so far away from a coin flip over, say, a 3-day trip because there's variance, there's a low house advantage, and the gameplay is pretty slow. But if you go for 3 days and you're playing slots the whole time, you could lose a lot of money because you're just getting so many iterations. You're playing so many games in that amount of time. So that's part of what drives that very high revenue stream that these casinos are getting from slot play. And as far as the house advantage goes, nicer places typically have higher house advantages, and you can kind of think that this correlates with what you learn in economics in general, that if you want something good, you tend to have to pay more. So if you go to a really nice casino, let's say you go to the Cosmopolitan in Las Vegas, it's likely that their house advantages are higher because people want to be there anyway, because they're serving better drinks, because they have better entertainment, their costs are higher. So for lots of reasons, they're going to tend to charge more. So if you're really wanting to play slots with a low house advantage, on average, you're better off finding kind of an off-the-strip place that's maybe not so nice. In general, the greater expense on a game, the lower the house advantage. So if you're playing a game that has you're only playing for a nickel, chances are that nickel game is going to have a pretty high house advantage, closer to the 12% than the 6%. Whereas if you're playing something that's maybe $100 a hand, the house advantage is probably going to be down at, say, 4 or 5%. In some cases, even lower than that. So in general, the cheaper the game, the more you have to play, and that has to do with cost. If you think about a slot machine, slot machines all take up pretty close to the same amount of space. So in terms of revenue streams, the cheaper games are going to have to take more away from the player to make it worthwhile to have those in a casino. If you're playing only a nickel a spin and the house advantage is only 5%, there's no way the casino can make a profit off of that when you consider, the cost of rent, electricity, everything else. And then thirdly here, playing the max bet tends to lead to a lower house advantage. If you've played slot machines here, you probably know what I'm referring to. If you've never played slot machines, you probably don't know what I'm talking about here at all. But it turns out that a very common style of play in Vegas is you get these penny games. All right, and if you go to Vegas, you'll see these big signs. This is the penny slot area, and a lot of games, indeed, you can actually go up and play for 1 penny, but a lot of them you can't. A lot of them have, say, a 25-cent minimum or even a $1 minimum, even though they're called a penny game. It's a creative way the casino has figured out to make things seem cheaper than they actually are. The penny usually refers to how many lines you're playing. So if you think about a slot machine that has multiple reels, there's actually multiple ways to bet it. And you'll see this in some of the videos that I'm showing. So just to kind of illustrate this, a lot of slot machines look sort of like this. They're a screen, and then there's different shapes in all of these screens, and I'm just drawing some sort of random figures here. But it may be fruit. The old school games might have fruit or dollar signs or something. And some of the newer games, you might be playing, Family Guy slots, where everything there is one of the characters from the game or from the TV show or some activity that happened in the TV show. It's all very chaotic, these games. There's lots of stuff going on. But what these games progress to have over time is, initially you're just betting on this middle line. And you're trying to get this middle line to match up. But over time, what they've done is they've made it where there's multiple lines. So you might bet on the first, second, and third line of this game. Now you've got 3 bets. And so for a penny game, you might be betting 3 pennies. And you can sort of imagine there's almost, there's a significant amount of possibilities here. I was going to say almost infinite. Well, it's not almost infinite. But there are a significant number of possibilities here in terms of gameplay. So that could be a line, that could be a line, this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so you can actually go up to one of these machines in Vegas a lot of times and play every different type of line that's potentially available. And as the game gets bigger with more images on the screen, you can imagine that the number of bets grows exponentially. And so if you see one of these slot machines, a lot of times they have just a huge screen, and there will be just tons and tons of different bets you can make. So getting back to this statement, playing the max bet tends to lower your house advantage. On a 1-cent game, the max bet might be $3. That's a pretty common amount in Vegas. So what that means is you might be able to bet as little as 1 cent. But if you bet the full $3, the game kind of incentivizes you to do that by reducing the house advantage. A lot of times the jackpot feature of the game only kicks in if you're betting the full maximum amount. So if you're really just trying to have the lowest house advantage, a good way to do that would be to find an expensive game at a crappy casino and bet the absolute maximum. Of course, although the house advantage in percentage terms would be pretty low in a game like that, you're still likely to lose a tremendous amount of money, because if you're wagering $3, you're still going to lose more in dollars than the person who's only betting 1 cent. Okay? This is referring to only percentages when we think about house advantages here.